How momentum quietly shifted. No announcement marked the change. No chart captured the moment it began. Momentum didn't break. It drifted, slowly, almost politely, until one day the empire realized it was no longer setting the pace. It was reacting to it. Momentum is rarely lost in a single mistake. It fades through small hesitations that feel responsible in isolation. This story matters because the most dangerous shifts in power happen when leaders believe they are still moving forward, just more carefully than before. The billionaire at the center of this moment had built a reputation for timing, knowing when to move, knowing when to wait. Their empire thrived on entering markets just early enough to shape them, but late enough to avoid reckless risk. It was a balance few ever mastered. The reveal began with restraint. A promising opportunity surfaced, not explosive, not urgent, but clearly early. Advisors recommended patience. The data was incomplete, the downside uncertain. Waiting felt prudent. The billionaire agreed. There would be time. There always had been. The next opportunity arrived months later. Slightly clearer, slightly safer. Still early, but no longer alone. Competitors were watching. The billionaire hesitated again. Not out of fear, out of discipline. Moving too early could waste capital. Moving too late had never happened before. This time, waiting felt strategic. The reveal deepened as this pattern repeated. Opportunities were acknowledged, tracked, and deferred. Each delay felt justified. Each one framed as wisdom earned through experience. The empire was still moving, just not first. The billionaire noticed something subtle in meetings. Language shifted from momentum was no longer assumed. It was conditional. The first sign appeared externally. A competitor announced a move the billionaire had considered months earlier. The execution wasn't perfect. The timing wasn't flawless. But they were there first. They shaped expectations, defined the conversation. The empire followed later, competently, carefully, and without surprise. No alarm sounded. The company remained strong. Revenues held. Analysts praised discipline. The shift was not dramatic enough to feel dangerous. That was the illusion, because momentum doesn't disappear loudly. It changes direction quietly. The billionaire began to feel it emotionally before it showed up in numbers. Decisions felt heavier. Timing felt tighter. Windows seemed to close faster than before. The world felt less patient. The empire was still powerful, but it was no longer ahead. And once momentum shifts from leading to following, reclaiming it is far harder than recognizing when it first began to move. The conflict was forming beneath the surface, not as failure, but as drift. And drift, left unchecked, decides outcomes long before leaders realize they are no longer steering. The drift became visible through contrast. Each time the empire entered space, someone else was already there, not dominant, not unbeatable, just established enough to define the rules. The billionaire watched as first-mover advantage quietly accumulated elsewhere, deal by deal, narrative by narrative. The reveal deepened when internal teams began benchmarking instead of pioneering. Presentations reference competitor moves more often than original proposals. Strategy sessions opened with analysis of what others had done, not what could be done next. The empire was still intelligent, still capable, but increasingly reactive. The conflict sharpened during a critical planning cycle. A team presented an opportunity that felt familiar. The data supported it. The risks were acceptable. The timing felt right. Finally, as the billionaire listened, a realization surfaced that was impossible to ignore. They had seen this before, months ago, maybe years. This was not a new opportunity. It was a delayed one. The emotional weight settled heavily. The empire was not missing chances because it lacked insight. It was missing them because it waited for certainty in a world that rewarded presence. By the time certainty arrived, momentum belonged to someone else. Inside the organization, behavior adapted to the new reality. Leaders became cautious about proposing early moves. Why push for something that would likely be deferred? Ambition recalibrated itself downward. Ideas were framed conservatively, designed to survive, review rather than define the future. The billionaire noticed themselves asking different questions. Less, Text equals text.replace 94. How fast will we move? 94 more. Text equals text.replace 94. What happens if we wait? 94. The shift felt subtle, rational, almost invisible, and deeply consequential. The conflict was no longer about one delayed move. It was about identity. The empire had been built on timing. It was now defined by patience. Patience can be strength, but patience without urgency becomes surrender. The reveal sharpened when a younger executive spoke candidly during a review. Text equals text.replace 94. We're excellent at entering markets. 94, they said. Text equals text.replace 94. Just not at creating many more. 94. The room went quiet. The billionaire felt the truth of it immediately. Momentum had not been lost in a dramatic reversal. It had been given away, incrementally, through decisions that felt responsible and measured at the time. The conflict now demanded a reckoning. Either accept a future defined by reaction, or rediscover the appetite to move before certainty arrives. The next step would determine whether momentum could still be reclaimed, or whether the empire would permanently settle into following a pace set by others. The conflict reached its peak when hesitation finally collided with speed. A new shift emerged suddenly, faster than the others, less forgiving. Signals appeared almost simultaneously across markets, technologies, and consumer behavior. This time, waiting would not just cost advantage, it would cost relevance. The billionaire felt the urgency immediately. This was not a familiar pattern unfolding slowly. This was acceleration, the kind that compresses years into months and punishes those who arrive second. Instinct sharpened, experience aligned. The move was obvious, and yet the organization hesitated, not out of resistance, but habit. Analysis was requested. Scenarios were built. Risks were mapped. The same disciplined process that once protected momentum now slowed response. The empire was thinking while others were moving. The emotional tension intensified sharply. The billionaire pushed for speed, but speed now required justification. Early commitment looked aggressive. Acting without full clarity felt irresponsible inside a culture trained to wait. Momentum, once natural, now had to be argued for. That was the fracture. In a single meeting, the billionaire realized how deeply the drift had settled. Leaders spoke about text equals text.replace 94, catching up 94 instead of text equals text.replace 94, getting ahead. 94 proposals focus on mitigation rather than position. The language of leadership had shifted from creation to defense. The breaking moment arrived when a competitor announced a decisive move into the very space under discussion. Not perfect, not polished, but early. The market reacted instantly. Attention shifted. Expectations reset. The empire approved its response days later. The difference was no longer subtle. The billionaire felt the full weight of the pattern. This was not bad luck. This was not miscalculation. This was the accumulated result of dozens of small delays, each one reasonable, each one justified, each one surrendering a fraction of initiative. Momentum had not been stolen. It had been traded away. The emotional peak settled into resolve. The billionaire understood that restoring momentum would require more than a single bold move. It would require changing how the organization related to uncertainty itself. The conflict was now undeniable. Either the empire would continue optimizing for certainty, or would relearn how to act while the picture was still incomplete. The next decision would not be about strategy alone. It would be about identity, and whether the organization was still capable of choosing speed over safety before the world moved on without it. The climax arrived when the billionaire finally chose to reverse the drift, not with a single dramatic gamble, but with a structural shift in how momentum was allowed to form. In a decisive leadership session, they named the pattern without accusation. The empire had not become weaker. It had become slower by design. Then came the change. Decision windows were shortened deliberately. Early moves were no longer required to prove certainty, only coherence. Teams were empowered to act on incomplete information when timing mattered more than precision. Waiting was no longer the default. It became a conscious choice that had to be defended. The shift was uncomfortable. Some leaders feared missteps. Others worried about inconsistency. But movement returned almost immediately. Not every early action succeeded. Some bets failed quietly. But the empire began arriving first again, shaping conversations instead of responding to them. The resolution unfolded through momentum itself. Energy concentrated. Proposals sharpened. The organization relearned how to sense acceleration instead of waiting for confirmation. Speed stopped feeling reckless and started feeling intentional. The billionaire reflected on the lesson with clarity earned through loss. Momentum is not a result. It is a behavior. It belongs to those willing to move before the story is finished. Those who accept that certainty always arrives too late to lead. The mistake had never been patience itself. It was forgetting when patience becomes delay. The empire moved forward change, not by abandoning discipline, but by rebalancing it with urgency. Timing returned as an advantage, not a risk. The organization stopped asking whether it was ready and started asking whether the moment would wait. It wouldn't, and that understanding restored something no chart could capture: initiative, because momentum doesn't reward the smartest analysis. It rewards the courage to move while others are still deciding. Subscribe to join the journey.